I know it's been a while since I last posted, but I've managed to find somewhere safe. So much has happened since I last managed to get online properly. The game's changed again. I've just been trying my best to keep a low profile after my previous posts drew quite a bit of unwanted attention, but now I just need to get this out there. Thank you all for your kind words and suggestions. It's been good to know that there are people out there who sympathise with me. God knows how I would have been able to cope with all this alone. So the last time I was able to post, I was hiding out in that quiet cafe near the newly shrunk border. It was just after I realised exactly what I'd gotten myself into. After the bird-masked man had shot those people on the stage, and my wife had been threatened after I'd left the area of play. I stayed there for as long as I could, trying my best to sink into the furniture and sitting as far away from the window as possible. My mind was reeling. I was pretty sure I was going to die. All I could think about was how my wife wouldn't know. She'd think I was away on a business trip and never came back again. I wanted more than anything to call her, to tell her what was going on. But I knew in doing so I'd be putting her in danger. Sifting through the miasma of feelings whirling through me, I was nearly oblivious to the other patrons. I hardly noticed them as they slowly trickled away one by one, each taking their leave, until finally I was the only one left in the cafe. Something touched my shoulder and I screamed, the blood-curdling echo sounding around the empty building. Jumping to my feet, my heart beat a frantic rhythm as I spun around, staring wide-eyed into the wrinkled face of the owner. Obviously startled by my outburst, he looked at me with concern in his eyes and a nervous pang in his voice as he told me it was time for him to close up. Although I knew I couldn't stay there forever, the same horror I'd felt only a few hours ago as I watched that stream filled me as I imagined a hunter lurking outside waiting for me. I pleaded with the owner to let me stay for a few more minutes, just so I could have some time to think before I had to face the outside world again. From the nervous look in his eyes and the way that he was wringing his hands, I could tell that he wanted me gone, but was too polite to say anything. I sighed heavily and resigned myself to the fact that I wouldn't be able to stay there, making my way to the door. As the night's cold air brushed against my cheeks and the cafe closed behind me, I knew I needed to get off the streets. I'd be a sitting duck out here. My head darted around, looking for any sign of movement as I made my way through the dimly lit streets, scrutinizing any patches of darkness, anything out of reach of the streetlights, for any sign of movement. I needed to go somewhere. Anywhere. But I had no ideas. My mind was too scrambled from what I'd seen, and the adrenaline that had so far been keeping the pain from my injured ribs and leg away had pretty much ebbed off at this point, making each step an agony as I gradually stumbled forwards. I couldn't get a hotel. I had no money. I'd spent the little pocket change I had left in that cafe, buying the occasional drink as a justification for staying there all evening. Sure, I had my card, and sure I had money in my bank account, but that was a one-way ticket to getting captured. If the hunters had managed to get onto the dark web to join the game in the first place, it wasn't too much of a stretch to imagine that at least one of them was monitoring mine and the other hiders' accounts. If I used my card anywhere, and they were watching, it would light up my location like a Christmas tree. No, I needed to be clever about this. Racking my brains, I continued walking along. All the while my eyes darted side to side, and I was ready to run at a moment's notice. Eventually, after making my way along a few more streets, the first stirrings of an idea started to form in my mind. Gradually coalescing into something more concrete as I mulled it over, I finally had something. It was risky. If I messed up, then I'd be back to square one. Or worse, standing on that stage in front of the man in the bird mask. But it was the best I could come up with on short notice. I made my way further into the city, looking over my shoulder all the way. The streets were nearly abandoned now, although I did pass the occasional other pedestrian. I kept my frantic eyes fixed on them as I approached, my heartbeat steadily increasing as I scanned their features for anything that would give them away as a hunter. Inevitably, to my relief, they would pass me by, occasionally looking back with a confused glance as I watched them walk away. Then there were the cars. With each rumbling engine that I heard, a spike of adrenaline coursed through me. The glaring headlights that bathed me each time a vehicle appeared on the road sent a jolt of panic burning through me. I expected to hear the screeching of brakes as a car slammed to a halt in front of me, and a hunter charged out, ready to sentence me to my death for the amusement of several other anonymous sociopaths on the dark web. One van in particular set my teeth on edge. It seemed to crawl along behind me, as though its occupants were trying to suss me out, its headlights preventing me from seeing the driver. I tried to pick up the pace, but with each forceful step, my legs screamed at me to slow down. All the while I was expecting to hear the slamming of doors and the frantic footsteps of someone running towards me, ready to throw me in the back and cart me off to God knows where. Relief washed over me as a few seconds later, the lights passed me by. The driver of the vehicle not so much as giving me a second glance. I didn't know how much more of this I could take. I just needed to get there. Then I could get off the streets. My idea wasn't exactly safe by any means, but at least I wouldn't be vulnerable like this. After what felt like hours of trudging through the gloomy streets, the houses slowly broke away, revealing the large open space of a nearly empty car park, and further on, the glowing fluorescent light of this city's Walmart. The cafe had closed, but I knew that Walmart would still be open. It didn't close until 11 PM, so I still had a couple of hours left. Now, the very thought of shoplifting made me feel sick to my stomach. I had never so much as gotten a speeding fine, let alone actively considered committing a crime. But my situation was dire, and I couldn't think of any other way to do this without using my card and alerting the hunters. The store was fairly quiet, but there were still enough people perusing the shelves that I could try to blend in and look inconspicuous. Making my way towards the store, it was quiet other than the few evening stragglers. Surprisingly, even with my haggard appearance and blood-stained trouser leg, I wasn't the strangest looking person there. I grabbed a cart from outside and made my way into the bright lights of the store. Walking through the automatic doors, my head was on a swivel as I made my way from shelf to shelf. I just needed a few supplies, that was all. Like a sleeping bag, some different clothes, painkillers, and a few other necessities. Then I could just walk out the door as though I'd paid, and hopefully the security guard would be none the wiser. Still, my heart pounded in my chest as I made my way around the store, trying to move as inconspicuously as I could. I swear I could feel the eyes of the other shoppers fixed on me as I walked from aisle to aisle. A chill worked its way through me as I wondered if any of these people were perhaps some of the viewers of the stream, watching us like mice trapped in a cage. It was all hosted on the dark web and anonymous after all. They could be anyone. There was one particularly strange man in a greasy-looking, worn maroon sweater, who I was certain was involved somehow. It seemed as though he was tracking my progress around the store. I saw him around several of the aisles while I was filling my cart. Each time he would fix me with a strange expression, an almost knowing one. He wasn't a hunter. I was sure of that. He didn't look anything like any of the pictures that I'd been sent, but he still unnerved me nonetheless. I tried to pick up my pace and get out of there. As I'd nearly finished my trip around the store, gathering my supplies, I began making my way towards the automatic doors, keeping the security guard firmly in my view. He was busying himself with a magazine in his booth, paying no attention to me. Just as the doors were within range, about to slide open on their own, a jolt of terror coursed through me as I remembered my phone. I'd not charged it since all this started. If it died, and my location was no longer visible to the organisers, then God knows what they would do to my family. Dragging the cart to a halt, I quickly spun around and shrank into the depths of the store. I needed a charger and somewhere to charge it. The man in the sweater was there again. He watched as I selected a charger and threw it into the cart, fixing me with a slight grin and that knowing expression again that made me feel sick. Shaking it off, I turned and started to make my way back towards the automatic doors. Approaching the doors again, the security guard was no longer in his booth. No longer distracted by his magazine, he had gotten up and started to make his way towards the tills. Cold sweat broke across my forehead as I watched him getting closer and closer to me. My heart beat a frantic drumbeat in my ears. He knew what I was going to do. I'd walk out of the door and he'd put his hand on my shoulder and drag me back in. That was it. I was as good as caught. If he stopped me, he would be guaranteed to call the police, and then I'd be stuck in a cell with no way to charge my phone and no reasonable explanation for what I was doing. The organisers would kill my family, and I'd be a sitting duck for any opportunistic hunter. As the sounds of his shoes clacking against the polished concrete floor grew louder and louder, I closed my eyes, readying myself to charge through the door and try to run across the car park as fast as I could. I doubted I'd get far with my injuries, but I was getting desperate. Without these supplies, I would be back to square one. Worse even, as I'd wasted all this time. Turning to glance at the security guard again, he met my gaze, his steely blue eyes locking with mine for a few moments. I froze, my legs suddenly feeling as though they were made of lead. He was closing the distance between us, and at such a pace that I had no hope of outrunning him. As if in slow motion, he opened his mouth to speak and I cringed, expecting the shout of, "Hey you, stop right there!" I waited, locked in place, resigned to what was about to happen. But, much to my relief, the only words that left his mouth were, "Good evening, sir," as he passed me by and continued onwards towards the tills. "Good evening," I murmured with great effort, pulling my face into what I hoped was a normal-looking, trustworthy smile. My legs were shaking, but had been freed from the terrified paralysis that had gripped them a moment ago. Not wasting any more time, I forced the cart through the exit, and the cool night air once again greeted me. I was outside, in the clear. I'd done it. Although it made me feel sick to my stomach that I'd just shoplifted, that I was now a criminal, part one of the plan was off to a flying success. Once all this was over, I'd go back and pay for everything I'd taken, but right now I just needed to focus on the plan. Now all I needed to do was enact the second part. Moving swiftly, before anyone inside the store realised I'd shoplifted, I pushed the cart past the glass front window towards the edge of the building, out of sight of the store workers. Daring to take one last glance back inside to make sure I wasn't being watched, my scalp tightened as the eyes of the man in the worn maroon sweater met mine. He was watching me through the glass as I walked along the front of the supermarket. That same knowing grin was spread across his face, and I swear I saw him mouth something that looked like, "Good luck," before the store's interior was blocked out by the brick of the outer wall. shaken, I tried to get the image of his face out of my mind. He had to be one of those sickos tuning in to watch us each night. Or even worse, what if he was one of the organisers? Either way, seeing him standing there was a harsh reminder of exactly how unsafe I was, and how they knew everything that was going on. Moving around to the back of the store, I rested my cart against the back wall and waited under cover of darkness, peering around the corner. 2 large dumpsters were pressed flush to the wall near a solid metal door, just like I'd hoped. Turning back to my cart, I shoved the charger, clothes, painkillers, and my other ill-gotten goods into my large sleeping bag, taking a couple of the painkillers as I stood there and waited. Sitting in the dark on the cold sidewalk by the side of the store, I felt so vulnerable. The sounds of cars entering and exiting the car park, although few and far between, were enough to set my teeth on edge. After what felt like an eternity had passed, another sound met my ears, and I got to my feet, readying myself for what was about to come next. Just before the store closed at 11, the sound of the metal door opening echoed around the empty parking lot. Sliding up to the corner of the store, I peered around to see a tall, thin man in his late teens wheeling out a large trolley filled to bursting with food. The wheels squeaked as the less than enthusiastic worker pushed the trolley over to the dumpster, flinging open the lid and carelessly throwing the contents of the trolley inside. I stood there, dimly aware of the throbbing ache in my leg, as the trolley slowly emptied of its contents and was finally wheeled back inside through the metal door. Waiting for a few more minutes, in case there was any more waste to bring out, when the young man failed to materialise again, I gingerly made my way around the corner and over to the dumpster. Throwing open the lid, I had to cover my nose to save it from the vicious onslaught of stench that came from within. Now I know what you're thinking, and yes, some of it was disgusting, but I only took the parts that were packaged. If it was loose, or had touched something that looked rancid, I left it well enough alone. The last thing I wanted was to have survived gunshot wounds and car crashes, just to be hospitalised by a bad tuna sandwich. I gathered up enough to make a semi-decent meal, not wanting to linger too long in case anyone discovered me. All in all, I ended up with a few cakes that had exceeded their sell-by date, a roast chicken, and a couple of cans of Diet Coke. It was hardly the most nutritious meal, but you'd be surprised at the amount of still edible food that supermarkets throw out daily. Once I'd stashed my meal securely in the sleeping bag with the rest of my stolen goods, I looked around, trying to assess what to do next. I could try and hide out in a park, maybe? I had a sleeping bag and some other essentials. I could try and stay there as long as I could, and only venture out to charge my phone, or for food like some kind of hermit. Shaking my head, I knew that wouldn't work. The only park that was within that circle of play was a small, well-kept public park that saw a lot of use. There's no way I'd be able to hide there without people seeing me. If anything, the appearance of someone sleeping rough in the park would draw more attention than anything. I needed something else. Quickly scanning around again, in case I was being watched, my eyes locked onto something against the wall by the dumpster, and a new idea began forming in my head. It was a thick drain pipe, at least 6 inches across. Towering at least 18 feet off the ground, it led all of the way down from the supermarket roof, securely fastened to the wall in several places, before vanishing in the concrete of the floor at the bottom. If I could somehow climb that pipe, I could get onto the roof. I could easily hide out there. No one would think to look for me in such an odd place, and I would have a good vantage point to ensure that no hunters snuck up on me. I could hide up there for the rest of the game in relative safety. Plus, if I needed anything, like food, water, or anything else, then I could shimmy down the drain pipe again and get it out of the dumpster. It was perfect. My heart beat rapidly with excitement at the prospect that I may have just found a way to survive this. Pushing my cart over to the drain pipe, I leaned against the cold metal, testing my weight against it. It didn't budge, the thick iron bolts holding it firmly against the brick wall. This might just work. I knew it would be a hard climb, what with my injured ribs and leg. But if I was careful, and used the brackets supporting it as footholds, then I was sure I could make it. Besides, what other options did I have? Taking several more items from the dumpster to keep me going for a few days, and stuffing them into my sleeping bag, I tied it at the end in a loose knot. Hurling it up into the air towards the roof, my ribs twinged with the movement. It soared through the night, and landed with a dull thud on the PVC above me. There was no going back now. If I couldn't make it up there, then this entire evening would have been a waste. Moving into position, I clambered onto the top of the dumpster. A dull fire burned its way across my chest as I pulled myself along the hard metal lid, and my cracked ribs took my weight, causing my eyes to water. It died down to a throb as I stood, but it remained there as a menacing reminder that I was not in a good way. I needed to be careful. I looked the drain pipe up and down, psyching myself up for the climb ahead. Although there was only 12 foot between the dumpster and the roof, and the holds around the pipe looked pretty sturdy, I couldn't shake the whining voice in the back of my head telling me that this was a terrible idea. If I fell from that height, I wouldn't kill myself, but I would sure as hell break something, and then I'd be stuck in hospital. If the hunter who'd crashed his car into me had been abducted from the hospital before being shot on that stage, then what chance would I have with a leg or an arm in a cast? I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying my best to ignore the throbbing radiating out from my chest and leg. Then, snapping my eyes open, I reached forward and grabbed the nearest iron fastenings, gripping it tightly as I brought my feet to rest on another below. My ribs screamed as I stretched out to reach the next fastening, and I snapped my arm back with a yelp. Taking a few slow breaths, I tried again, reaching out for the hold, trying my best to fight through the searing pain now radiating out of my core. Hooking my hand onto it, I quickly brought my other up to meet it. The pain of even that small movement was excruciating, but I did it. Breathing out a sigh of relief as I brought my foot up to the next fastening, the pain in my chest subsided slightly as my body relaxed a little, no longer stretched taut. I hung there, shivering slightly from the pain. I wanted more than anything to stay there, or to go back down to the dumpster lid. The idea of reaching my arm up again sent a pang of anxiety through me, but I knew I needed to do it, that it was the only way I'd be able to get onto the roof. I had no other ideas, and I'd just thrown everything I'd stolen from the store up there, so if I needed to carry on, there was no other choice. There were only 2 more fastenings between me and the roof. I only had to raise my hand up 3 more times in total, and then I'd be on the roof and all this would be over. I'd be safe up there, and I could rest for a while without fear of being caught. Using that thought to power through my anxiety, I shot my hand up again. The familiar, searing pain emanated across my chest again, tightening and making me cough slightly. But I fought through it as best I could, fumbling with my fingers until they hooked onto the fastening. Immediately swinging my other arm up to meet it, I dragged myself up and hung there for a few seconds, allowing myself a few breaths before reaching out again. The agony in my chest intensified with each inch my arm stretched. It felt as though I was ripping myself in half, tearing at my lungs and snapping my bones with each movement. I missed the final fastening, my arm swinging wide, and I had to fight to maintain my balance. I was about 12 feet off the ground now, hanging there on that pipe. If I'd fallen from here, it would be as though I'd fallen out of a second-story window. Not fatal, but not a nice fall either. Combine that with my existing injuries, and I'd be in a sorry shape. Scrambling to grip the pipe again with my free hand, I hung there as the wind whipped through my hair. I couldn't afford to stop here much longer. I needed to get up. My forearms were burning along with my chest, and I didn't know how much longer they'd be able to hold out for. I needed to get onto the roof soon, or I'd lose my grip and fall anyway. Taking a sharp breath, I gripped my teeth as I threw my arm up again. The fire in my chest reached an unbearable intensity as my fingers latched around the fastening. Dark clouds lingered at the edges of my vision as I pulled myself up, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. They threatened to consume my vision, sapping my strength the longer I lingered. Everything felt heavy as my body was trying its best not to pass out due to the pain. I was so close now. So close. I just needed to pull myself onto the roof. Then all this would be over. Then I could rest. With a shaking hand, I reached up again. Thankfully, the gap between the final fastening and the roof was almost half the distance between the fastenings themselves, and I was able to reach it with minimal stretching, although the fire in my ribs still burned brightly. I thanked whichever gods would listen as I dragged myself onto the cool PVC of the roof, lying there in complete disbelief as I thought about all of the ways that could have gone wrong. The cool night air whipped at my skin as I lay on the exposed roof, a sharp contrast to the white-hot pain in my chest. Slowly getting to my feet, I glanced around and located my sleeping bag a few feet away from where I'd clambered onto the roof. Scooping it up, I took in my surroundings. The roof was mostly flat and divided into 3 sections. The low section I was on, a slightly raised middle section, and another low section matching this one. There were also a couple of raised areas where the air conditioning unit sat, breaking through the monotony of the landscape. A small stair bulkhead with a large metal door that obviously led down into the store itself sat in the middle section. Behind the bulkhead, separated by a narrow gap, was a mound almost as tall as it, covered loosely in a tarpaulin. Making my way over to it, I could just about make out the dark fabric underneath, flapping loosely in the wind. It was white and red, with a few black patches. Getting closer, I recognized the colours. Santa! This must have been where the store kept its inflatable winter decorations when they weren't using them. My heart soared as I imagined the Christmas lights, and the realization dawned on me that there must have been something up here to power them, some kind of outlet. Glancing around, I could just about make out 2 waterproof outlets on the back wall of the bulkhead, just between it and the mound of deflated decorations. This was perfect. If I could squeeze myself between that gap, I could create a well-hidden shelter that would be out of the way of the wind. Plus I could charge my phone. Sliding my way between the mound and the bulkhead, I pulled out my stolen phone charger, plugging it into the outlet before darting underneath the loose tarpaulin of the mound and out of sight. The plastic sheeting provided some shelter from the wind as I huddled up close to the deflated mound. I unfurled my sleeping bag in the dim light, tinged blue as it seeped through the tarpaulin, and laid it down next to me as I took out the food. Wolfing down one of the cakes, some of the chicken, and one of the cans of Diet Coke. This was the safest I'd felt since I'd left the cafe, and I finally allowed myself to relax a little. All I needed to do was wait up here for a while. Just wait this whole thing out. I sat there, hunger now thoroughly sated, and allowed myself to rest. And within a few minutes, the fatigue of the day had caught up with me. I was in pain, exhausted, and wanted nothing more than to sink into oblivion. My eyelids drooped heavily as I positioned my sleeping bag closer to the mound, leaning it against the soft fabric of the inflatables to use as a makeshift pillow. Seconds after slipping inside, I was fast asleep. Much to my surprise, I slept like the dead. The rippling wind and the sounds of distant cars dimming into nothing but white noise. Even in the early hours of the morning when the store opened, the sounds of the car park and the faint music within the building itself were nothing more than mere humming in the distance. At some point in the early morning, as it was just beginning to get light, I was ripped from my slumber by a high-pitched whining noise. My eyes snapped open as the noise stopped, being slowly replaced by the clicking of footsteps as someone made their way onto the roof through the open metal door of the bulkhead. I froze, unable to understand what was happening in my half-asleep state. There was someone on the roof. What if it was a hunter? A chilling thought tore through me. Had I been snoring? I'd never snored before. At least, my wife had never said anything. But what if I'd somehow started last night? What if a hunter had heard me snoring and had come up here to investigate on the off chance that someone like me was hiding? It wasn't exactly normal to hear snoring coming from a store roof. The footsteps sounded again, making their way across the roof. I held my breath, sitting there as still as I could, trying to become one with the mound next to me. If it was a hunter, then there was no way I could outrun them. But maybe they wouldn't find me if I was as quiet as humanly possible. Silently thanking my lucky stars that I was still obscured by the tarpaulin, all I could do was wait. My heart was beating a frantic tattoo in my ears as the footsteps drew closer. I closed my eyes, holding back the stirrings of tears, waiting for the tarpaulin that covered me to be viciously torn away and for a hand to reach out and grab me. Then another bolt of fear coursed through me, as I remembered that my phone charger was still connected to the outlet in the wall. The cable was trailing down and led under the tarpaulin where my phone sat. If anyone turned the corner and saw the outlet, then I was done for. What felt like hours passed as I listened to those footsteps, waiting for the inevitable. Then a voice cut through the background noise, and a flutter of hope filled me. Bloody wind, it's freezing up here. I don't understand why Jake insists I have to come up here for a smoke. Why can't I just do it out front? The footsteps seemed to turn back towards the door, getting slightly fainter before they ceased, followed by the high-pitched whining of the metal door's hinges as it closed. I'd recognized the voice as soon as I heard it. It was the security guard from last night. The one who I thought was going to catch me as I walked out. Slumping back again, the fear and terror now seemed silly. This whole game had got me paranoid. I just needed to focus on staying up here, staying hidden and safe. But for now, the danger had gone. After a couple of minutes, my eyelids gradually started drooping again as my body demanded sleep and I slipped back into blissful unconsciousness. When I next awoke, it was to the sounds of my phone pinging a notification. I had no idea what time it was, but it was beginning to get dark again. Fumbling around for my phone and wiping the sleep from my eyes with my free hand, I chastised myself for forgetting to set it to silent. Even with no hunters around, if the security guard or any of the other employees had come up onto the roof for a smoke, then they would certainly have heard that. My fingers collided with the cold metal of my phone, and I scooped it up, turning it around and unlocking it. Taking a couple of seconds to adjust to the sudden brightness, sure enough, there was a notification sitting there in the bar across the top. My heart sank as I looked at the message. Another email from a garbled mess of characters. I knew what it was before I even read the subject. Day 2 updates and ratings. Again, it was blank, other than for a single URL. I knew what I would see if I clicked it. I knew what would be happening. But I knew I needed to watch it. Not for some kind of sick enjoyment like the rest of the viewers, but I needed to know how many other people were left in the game. The fewer hiders that remained, the more likely it was that I would get caught. Tapping the URL, that app that had been installed on my phone previously, The Devil's Games, forced itself to the front of the screen. It plunged into darkness as before, staying like that for several seconds before bursting into life and revealing a familiar sight. That dimly lit room filled the small, embedded video player, the familiar empty stage sitting there in full view. I shuddered as I noticed the red stains across the parts of the back wall, flashes of last night's execution bursting through my mind. Sickness welled in my throat as I remembered the terrified screams of those people as they were viciously gunned down by the man in the bird mask. Then movement from the screen dragged my attention back, as the same song and dance as yesterday played out again. 4 people were led out onto the stage, with their hands bound, while from the right appeared the familiar form of the man in the eagle mask. Well, folks, here we are again. What a day it's been. What a spectacle. I think we can all say this year's games have been the best we've had so far. Anger welled up in me as he started speaking, the gleeful tone of his voice worming its way uncomfortably under my skin. The way he was acting, you would have thought he was commentating on some kind of prestigious sports event, not something more akin to the Hunger Games. He was jovially walking across the stage as he spoke. Well, another day, another eliminations round. I never get tired of these. He drew the same shining pistol in his hand again as he danced around. The faces of the people on the stage morphed into masks of absolute terror as he turned to face them, whimsically waving the gun in their faces. Bile rised in my stomach as I knew what was about to happen next. I sat there, staring at each of the poor people who'd lost, trying to memorize their faces and tick them off my mental list. I was just focusing on the last one, an older man in his late 50s who looked as though he'd been badly beaten before he'd been dragged onto the stage, when shouting erupted and a flurry of movement filled the screen. There had been 2 hunters on the stage and 2 hiders. While the masked man was busy threatening the hiders, one of the hunters had managed to slip his hands free from his restraints and made a run for it. He charged across the room, screaming at the top of his lungs. Two large men on the edge of the camera turned to face him and began to move, but the masked man didn't seem to notice, continuing his jovial ramblings. The hunter made it maybe 15 feet before he was tackled to the ground by one of the larger guards, landing with a sickening crunch. With the weight of the guard bearing down on him, all he could do was scream and yell obscenities at the masked man as he slowly danced his way towards him. Turning to face the camera, the masked man stood over the hunter, digging the heel of his well-polished shoe into the screaming man's neck, holding him in place. Well, 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 folks, would you look at that? You have to admire that kind of spirit. It's what makes these games a great spectacle they are today. His head dropped slightly, almost as though he was saddened as he continued. If only he'd shown that kind of enthusiasm earlier. Without missing a beat, he unloaded a round into the writhing man's head, stopping his flailing instantly. The muzzle of the pistol flashed 3 more times as he turned on his heel and executed each of the remaining players without saying a word, cutting their terrified screams short. Everything was still for a second, as though he was composing himself, before he turned to face the camera once again. I do apologize, my friends. I know this isn't the show you all tuned in for. This isn't what we're about here at the Devil's Games. We pride ourselves on our professionalism, and so trust me when I say that this will not happen again. Spinning to face the stage, he raised his pistol once again, this time at the man who had led the players onto the stage initially, the one I assumed was responsible for binding the players. The man started blubbering something about it being a mistake, how he wouldn't let it happen again. "I know you won't," replied the masked man, followed by the 5th and final muzzle flash as the blubbering man fell to the ground, a steady crimson pool seeping from the hole in his head. Well, now that we've done some housekeeping, there's only one thing left to do. A big congratulations to all of you lucky players who've managed to survive yet another day. Until tomorrow, adieu. He took a deep bow as he finished, before the feed cut and there was nothing but the black of my phone screen. Feeling well and truly disgusted, I locked my phone and dropped it onto the sleeping bag. I wish I could tell you that nothing more happened after that. That I'd just stayed on that roof for the rest of the game, and that was it. But things got so much worse after that. So much worse. I've managed to get a bit more time to post again. Between everything that's gone on, I'm still trying my best to get this out there. I need to let people know what's happening to me. To warn them. So if I remember correctly, the last time I posted, I'd just made it to the roof of the Walmart after making that risky climb up the drainpipe. I still look back at that now and think about how easily I could have fallen. Either way, I'd made it to the top and hidden myself under that tarp. I was all set to stay up there for the rest of the game, waiting the entire thing out from the safety of my vantage point. Each morning I'd hear the squealing of the door hinges as the security guard made his rounds, and I'd sit silently under the tarpaulin, waiting for the footsteps to fade away. Then, depending on the weather, I'd sit and take in the view, whilst being careful not to expose myself to anyone below. The food that I'd stolen from the dumpster lasted me for a while, although careful rationing helped too. I knew if I needed more I could always shimmy down the drainpipe again, but the thought of climbing back up filled me with anxiety and made my chest twinge. I'd spent the rest of my time watching things on my phone. Initially just TV shows and films, but after a while I found it hard to concentrate on them. All I could think about was my current situation. I found my attention always drifting back to the nightly streams that the organisers sent out. The terrified faces of the players were frozen in my mind as the pistol rounded on each of them, trapped in a perpetual scream. At one point, morbid curiosity ended up getting the better of me. Against my better judgment, I opened up the Devil's Games app. I had a gnawing need to know exactly what was going on. Selecting the hide and seek option from the menu, the page loaded before me. I needed to know what the organisers were getting from all this. Were they just selling their freaky customers the nightly executions? Or was there something more to this? I don't know what I expected, to be honest with you, but what I found sent my anxiety skyrocketing. There were several videos, some named after specific days, others labelled best bits. From what I could tell, they each seemed to be comprised of CCTV footage of the contestants, capturing the chaos of the game for the eager viewers on the dark web. I shuddered as I realised that they were tracking us. Not only were they killing us off on stream if we lost, but they were making videos of us too, selling them on to their salivating customers. That must be why they wanted our phones on at all times, so they knew where to look to make their sick shows. Unable to tear myself away from this newfound terror, I clicked on the preview for the video titled Day 1. They couldn't be turning all of this into some kind of TV show. They just couldn't be. That same embedded video player loaded up again as the screen went black, this time cutting to some grainy CCTV footage showing a woman running through a crowded street, frantically pushing past other pedestrians while constantly glancing over her shoulder. A few seconds later, a larger man with a nasty-looking scar across his cheek barreled past, knocking pedestrians flying as he charged towards the woman, tackling her to the ground. Then the video cut to a new image. My blood ran cold as I made out a scene I recognised. It was the mall food court. I could clearly see Jenny sitting there with her pizza. I was there too. All I could do was watch as she drew her pistol out of her bag and hit me around the back of the head while my back was turned. My cheeks blazed with embarrassment as I watched it back, and I kicked myself again for trusting her. Another cut revealed a new scene of a man who I remembered seeing on the stage in that evening's stream. He was being chased along a rooftop, terrified, by a woman who appeared to be brandishing a taser. She chased him to the edge of the rooftop, dragging him back to the ground, appearing to laugh maniacally as she tased him until he stopped moving. Feeling sick, I closed the app. I couldn't believe what was happening. That not only had we been tricked into joining this awful game in the first place, but now we were being exploited for their profit like some kind of trained animal. I found myself unable to shake what I'd seen in those videos from my mind for hours after that. I couldn't believe that I'd gotten myself into this situation. I was so stupid. Why had I thought that applying for the game was a good idea? I should have known it was too good to be true. After several more hours, I finally began to push those thoughts to the back of my mind. That's when the boredom set in. Although the rooftop was safe, there was absolutely nothing to do. Eventually, I ended up inventing small games to entertain myself. Near the top, I found a few empty paint cans, so I devised a game where I tried to throw some of the bones from my roast chicken into the open mouth of the can, and depending on the size of the bones, I'd get a certain amount of points. After a few days, I could easily throw the entire carcass in without missing a shot. The other can was used as a makeshift latrine. I kept it on the other end of the roof so that I didn't have to deal with the smell. As much as I was thankful for my hiding place, that was one of the worst parts of it for me. I found myself wishing each day that I'd chosen a spot with a bathroom. I tried to cover it with my old bloodied clothes to at least dampen the stench. but I was still terrified that one of the security guards would end up finding it when they came up for their morning smoke. Still, I was safe on that roof. My injured ribs started healing slightly after a couple of days of resting up, and my leg didn't hurt as much, although I couldn't feel some of it either, so it may very well have just been nerve damage setting in. I was nowhere near back to normal, and I suspected that any strenuous activity would send me spiralling back to how I'd been a few days ago. Those few days crawled by uneventfully, with no one any the wiser as to my hiding spot. I could almost forget about the hunters and the awful game that I'd gotten myself wrapped up in, until the daily message from the organisers came through. I'd long since set my phone on silent mode after the scare with the security guard, so I missed most of my notifications. But this one always made a noise, coming through every day like clockwork. Each time I'd watch it, the same show would unfold. The bird-masked man appearing with his jovial movements, and the faces of the terrified players bound there on the stage before being mercilessly executed. Each time I winced at the sound of the pistol firing, imagining myself on that stage before the masked freak. Thankfully, there were no more changes to the rules. I didn't know how I would have coped with that. I wasn't mentally prepared to leave the safety of the roof again. The shows had been the same for the past 3 days, although the last one had ended a little differently. The masked man had turned to the camera again after pulling the trigger on the final hider, wiping crimson discharge from the barrel of his weapon. Rather than taking his deep bow and bidding the audience adieu, he looked into the lens again, almost crestfallen. Well, that's all for tonight, folks. But there's just one last thing. It's come to our attention that some of you players aren't getting into the cat and mouse spirit of our little game. Now, here at the Devil's Games, we pride ourselves on producing exciting, quality content for our viewers. And if you're not participating, then you're nothing more than dead weight. We're down to half of you players now, so it's all still left to play for. I expect nothing but your best efforts. He paused for a second, turning his head as though scanning the faces of an invisible audience. Resuming his whimsical demeanour once again, he took his customary deep bow. Until tomorrow, my friends, and the excitement that it is bound to bring. Adieu. I couldn't help the chill that traced its way along my spine as the words "dead weight" replayed over and over in my head. The way he'd said it, he'd emphasized the words as though they were some kind of threat. I couldn't help thinking about how I'd been up here for the past few days. Was it aimed at me? Because I wasn't running around being chased by hunters like they wanted? Well, I didn't care. I couldn't care less if the way I was hiding up here didn't make for entertaining viewing. I needed to survive this. So if that meant I wasn't putting on a good enough show for them, then that was their problem. Swiping the app away, I went about the rest of my evening, watching TV on my phone and trying to shake the masked man's warning from my mind. It took a while longer than normal, but eventually my eyelids started drooping and I decided to get some shut-eye. The screeching of the door hinges snapped me awake with a start. It was dark, the tarpaulin blocking out any feeble light that might have tried to seep through from the car park lights, and my eyes took a second to adjust themselves. Sitting bolt upright, my head brushed against the plastic as I strained my ears to listen. There was nothing, just the silence of the night as I waited there, sweat beginning to bead on my forehead. Gently fumbling my fingers along the floor, I found my phone in the darkness and pressed the lock button. The brightness of the screen blaring into life blinded me momentarily as I tried to make out the time. Cold fear washed over me as I read the number. 3 a.m. It was 3 a.m. The store had been closed for several hours now. The security guard, the only person who ever seemed to come up here, wouldn't be back for at least another 3 hours. No one in their right mind would have come up here at this time. But as the clicking of heavy boots on the PVC floor grew closer and closer through the silence, I knew that whoever it was had to have come for me. I'd been caught. The footsteps stopped dead, what sounded like a few meters away, and I held my breath, listening to the pounding of my heart in my ears. The breathing of the intruder was the only sound, cutting through the quiet, heavy and slightly guttural. I sat there, frozen, not daring to move. I was still in my sleeping bag. I couldn't run, and even if I could, there was no way my leg would hold out long enough for me to outrun whoever this was. All I could do was wait, and hope that they gave up. They'd obviously come for me. They knew I was up here, but they didn't know exactly where. Maybe I could use that to my advantage. Make them think that perhaps I'd just left before they got here. I was racking my brain, trying to come up with a way out of my predicament, when a deep voice with an accent I assumed was Eastern European cut through the quiet rooftop. "Come out, David. I just want to talk." The hair on my neck stood on end. Although I was pretty sure whoever this was had come for me anyway, that confirmed it. They knew my name, and they knew I was up here. Sitting as still as a grave, I didn't dare to even blink, for the fear that the sound would give me away. How had the hunter possibly found me up here? "Come on, David. I'm not a hunter. You can come out. Like I say, I just want to talk." I didn't respond, staying as still and quiet as I could. They obviously didn't know exactly where I was, otherwise they'd have snatched the tarpaulin covering me. It was a trick to get me to give away my position, to reveal my hiding spot. All I could do was stay still and hope. "Look, David, I'm with the Devil's Games. I need you to come out here now." My phone lit up in my hands as a notification appeared. It was a message, from what I could tell, although it didn't appear to be from any of my normal messaging apps. Clicking it, the Devil's Game app burst to the front of my screen. A message window opened, revealing a single photo of a large man clad in a black tracksuit, wearing a smooth silver mask with no discernible features other than the 2 eye holes. I could make out the rooftop clearly, and the tarp-covered mound where I was hiding just behind him. "We're the only ones that can use the app to send messages, so there's your proof that I'm not lying. Now come out, we need to talk." Relief started welling up in me as I took in his words, only to be replaced by a crashing wave of fear. Sure, this guy wasn't a hunter, but if he was from the psychos that organised this whole thing, then that couldn't be much better. Why did they want to talk to me? And why had they sent this brute rather than just sending a message? "You're testing my patience, David." The sour note in his voice as he said my name made it abundantly clear that I couldn't outwait the man, and that pushing my luck by making him search for me was not something that I wanted to do. Muttering silently under my breath, I slowly lifted the tarpaulin. The large masked man was standing a few inches away from my hiding spot, the eye holes of his mask angled down towards me. "That's better," he said, taking a heavy step over and squatting his enormous bulk down next to me. "What's this all about? You've got me trapped in your stupid game. What more could you psychos possibly want?" I asked, practically spitting the words. "Now, David, there's no need to be like that. I've just been sent here to remind you what these games are all about, is all." He drew something from the back of his belt, something long and metallic, and my blood turned to ice as I recognized it. Inspecting the pistol in the moonlight, the large man looked at it, passing it from hand to hand contemplatively. "You see, You're doing really well, David. You should be proud of yourself. You're one of the favourites to win this thing, actually. Is that what you came here to tell me? That I'm a fan favourite? You couldn't have just sent a message? I asked in disbelief, not taking my eyes off the gun. Haha, no. I just thought I'd let you know how you were doing, he said, chuckling to himself, still staring at the gun. No, the reason I've been sent here is because there's some concern with the higher-ups that you're doing too well. I balked as he turned to face me again, still holding the pistol firmly in his grip. You see, if all of the other hiders are out there every day, running and hiding like they're supposed to, and you're up here, safe and sound, well, that's not very fair on them, is it? Or on our viewers. It's not in the spirit of the game. Fuck your viewers. I couldn't care less if you lose ratings. I'm not risking my life anymore for this stupid game, I spat, surprising myself with the venom in my words. The man looked up and let out a large sigh, before slowly turning the barrel of the pistol towards me and training it at eye level. David, I was really hoping we could resolve this amicably. See, they sent me here to give you an incentive to get into the spirit, and give everyone a fighting chance. But I can see now it's going to be harder than I thought. If you won't listen to my words, then maybe I'll have to find another way to convince you. The colour drained from my face as a surge of adrenaline coursed through me, as what he was saying slowly dawned on me. He was going to shoot me. He was going to shoot me because I wasn't playing how they wanted. Because I'd found a safe place and hunkered down. I wasn't putting on a good enough show for them. My fight or flight instinct kicked in then and there, and I made the snap decision to run. Attempting to get to my feet and slide out of the sleeping bag in one quick movement, I collapsed as it wrapped around my ankles, sending me tumbling into the mound behind me. I was dimly aware that the shot I was expecting to ring out never came. Forcing myself to my feet again, I was about to make a run for the stairwell, when a searing pain emanated from the back of my head, spreading out in all directions before everything faded to black. When I awoke a few seconds later, I was on the ground next to my sleeping bag. My lungs felt tight and the fire in my chest had returned as I struggled to breathe. There was something heavy pressing down on my back, crushing my chest beneath it. Twisting myself round as much as I could, I turned to see the large masked man above me, pinning me to the ground with a heavy knee in my back. Ah, good. I didn't get you too hard, he said as he noticed my movement. Now, I really didn't want to do this, David, but it's obvious you won't listen to anything I have to say. He reached behind him, and something shone in the moonlight as he pulled it out of its sheath. Expecting to see the barrel of that pistol again, my scalp tightened as the shimmering edge of a nasty-looking combat knife came into view. He held it there, again inspecting it just like the pistol, as it reflected off the smooth surface of his mask. As if satisfied with it, he turned to me again, grabbing my right arm. I tugged my arm back and tried to kick out, but a sharp blow from the hilt of the knife sent my vision swimming again. Less of that, please, David. You're only going to make this harder, said the masked man almost sympathetically. Lying at my arm and pinning it in place with his other knee, he began to bring the knife closer. I let out a scream and writhed again as its tip descended closer and closer towards my hand. Scream all you want, David. There's no one around to hear you anyway. If I were you, I'd save your energy, he said, completely unfazed by the cacophony that I was making beneath him. All I could do was watch as the razor-sharp tip of the knife gently kissed the soft flesh of my ring and pinky finger, resting there for just a moment before being forced viciously through them. A sickening snap accompanied the movement, and a fiery white-hot pain flared out as my fingers were cleaved away, leaving 2 bloody stumps. I let out a wail of pain, my mind refusing to understand what was happening as I lay there, pinned on the floor, staring at the bloody stumps of what used to be my fingers. the crimson liquid pooling beneath them, spurting out with every throb, brought it all crashing down. There we go. I'm sure that'll serve as a good incentive for you to be more considerate of other players. You just need to get into the spirit of the games. Now, I'm under strict instructions from my superiors that I'm to get you playing properly, so please, don't make me come back and pay you another visit, he said, wiping my blood on his trousers and sliding the knife back into its sheath. Just so you know, I'm rooting for you, he said, bringing his fist down as the pain in my head flared up again and the world turned to black. I don't know how long I was out for, but when I awoke, my eyes stung with the orange glow of the rising sun. I felt awful. Everything felt heavy, and there was a throbbing pain emanating from the back of my head. Gingerly, I tried to push myself up into a sitting position. Agonizing jolts shot up from my right arm as soon as I tried to put my weight on it, and I collapsed down again in a heap. Turning to my injured arm, the sight of the browning, bandaged stumps of my fingers brought everything flooding back. My severed digits were still there on the floor, inches away from me, lying in a darkening pool of my own blood. Weakness and nausea washed over me as I stared at my mangled hand, remembering the warning from the masked man. He'd bandaged my hand before he left. Obviously I'd be no use to them if I bled out or got infected. But he'd made it very clear that if I didn't start playing the way that they wanted me to, they'd do something much worse than take a couple of fingers. As I sat there, unable to fathom quite how dire my situation had become, I heard the familiar squeal of the staircase door opening. The blood drained from my face as I heard footsteps clicking softly against the PVC flooring of the roof. No, not again. He couldn't be back again. They'd hardly given me any time. I'd been unconscious until just now. There's no way I could have moved from this spot. They couldn't punish me for that. It wasn't fair. Then again, what about this situation was fair? Gritting my teeth, I tried to force myself to my feet again. That agonizing pain flared up as soon as my bandaged hand made contact with the floor, and I swayed slightly under my own weight. But I forced myself to push, to stand up. Rocking gently from side to side as I tried to maintain my balance, my head swam and the pain in the back of my skull caused my vision to dim, threatening to eclipse it entirely. I needed to run, to hide. Taking a step forward, I stumbled as my legs gave way and fell with a thud into the tarp covering the mound of decorations. The footsteps stopped dead at the sound, and I heard a voice call out, "Hello? Someone there?" A short-lived sense of relief washed over me as I realized that it wasn't the voice of the masked man, only to be replaced by a newly refreshed sense of panic as I realized who it belonged to. The security guard. He was early. I needed to hide. He couldn't find me. I needed to get off the roof, now. Trying my best to stand again, all I managed to do was create even more noise, cursing myself as I collapsed into the tarp. After a third attempt, I managed to stand again, and reaching out a hand to steady myself on the bulkhead, I staggered my way around to the other side, away from the guard. The footsteps had started up again now, heading towards my former hiding place, before stopping dead again as the voice muttered to itself, "What the fuck? Hey, who's up here? Do you need help? Come out now where I can see you." He'd obviously seen the blood in my former fingers. I didn't know what to do. My head was pounding like a drum, and I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. My body was slowly starting to shake off the effects of shock, but I was still hardly in any state to run away. Even if I did manage to get to the stairs, he'd hear my footsteps echoing down the staircase and would definitely be able to catch up with me. There was no way I could climb off the roof without him seeing. If I made a dash for that drainpipe, he'd clock me before I'd even made it halfway. Even if by some miracle I'd made it, there was no way I'd be able to climb down in this state. Not with my hand like this. I was stuck. Closing my eyes for a second, with my back to the bulkhead, I took a deep breath, trying to come up with a plan, when a voice from my left broke through the silence and I froze. "Hey, you. What are you doing up here? Stay where you are and slowly turn around." My heart sank. He'd found me. It was all over. Defeated, I slowly obeyed, turning towards the guard. He was standing a few feet away from my left, brandishing a small can of mace threateningly from his extended right arm. "What happened up here? Who are you and where's the other guy?" What could I say? I'm in a secret game of hide and seek, only it's not hide and seek and they're killing us. I was hiding on the roof to try and save my life. Sorry for not telling you. There's no way I'd be able to explain what had happened on the roof. At least not without making myself seem crazy. I thought about rushing him. Maybe knocking him off the roof and trying to flee. Although I felt disgusted with myself as soon as I thought it. This man was innocent, just doing his job. It wasn't his fault I'd gotten myself caught up in all of this. If I'd knocked him off the roof just so I could escape, then I was no better than the degenerates that had organised this whole thing. I was done. "Other guy?" was all that I could muster as I stared at him, imagining how, in less than an hour, I'd be in a prison cell, and that would be it. My life would be over. "Yeah, you know, the big guy with the mask. What did you do to him?" He glanced down at the bloodied bandages on my right hand. "What the hell were you two doing up here?" It all clicked into place at that moment. He'd seen the man from last night climbing the stairs, probably on the security feed. That's why he'd come up so early. He knew something was up. The masked man must have done that deliberately, making sure that the security guard saw him and came up here to investigate, giving me yet another incentive to move. All I could do was stand there, numb, terrified as to what was going to happen next. There was no point in explaining myself, no point in trying to plead my innocence. I knew how it looked to him. He'd seen a masked man climbing the stairs and found a pool of blood and a couple of severed fingers, and then he'd found me, and no masked man. Even though he probably knew the fingers and blood were mine, it was still suspicious enough that he would definitely need to alert the police. After a few seconds of awkward silence, he ushered me along the roof and back down the staircase. I didn't bother resisting. I was defeated at this point, just accepting my fate. He led me through the back of the store into a small room which served as a security office. Sitting me in the chair in front of his desk, he asked me again what I was doing up there, and what had happened with the masked man. When I didn't give an answer, he sighed heavily before getting to his feet and walking over to the door. Opening it, he turned back to me with a concerned look in his eyes and told me that he'd need to call the police. Pausing for a second before adding that he would also call an ambulance. His words barely registered with me. I just stared ahead, unblinking, unable to think of anything other than how, in one fell swoop, my life was over. A sick sense of irony washed over me as I realised that it wasn't even a hunter that had caught me in the end. It was just a security guard, who was none the wiser as to what he was doing. As he exited the room, I could hear him on his phone just outside, speaking to the operator on the other end, unwittingly signing my death warrant. All I could imagine was how, by the time the day was out, I would be standing on the stage in front of the camera and the masked man. Then that would be the last anyone saw of me. My death at the hand of that masked murderer. My eulogy. I'd be another victim of this awful game. And worst of all, my family would have no idea what happened. My family. They'd never know. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't abandon them like that. Even if I had been caught, I didn't have the luxury of giving up. I needed to get back to them, to do everything in my power to at least try and escape. I owed it to them to do everything I could. Snapping out of the cloud of depression that had settled over me, I scanned the room for anything that might help me to get out of there. The room was a small office, containing only a desk, a large chair, with a smaller chair in front of it that I was sitting in. There was only one way out. Thinking back, I couldn't remember the security guard locking the door as he left to make his calls. That's not to say that he hadn't, but if it was still unlocked, then there was nothing stopping me from charging through the door, then rushing past him and out into the store before he could react. The shock and nausea that I'd felt this morning had been slowly ebbing away, and while I was nowhere near back to my usual self, I was pretty sure I'd be able to push myself hard enough to make this work. Maybe I'd be quick enough. Either way, I couldn't stay trapped in here. Mobility was going to be my main ally at the moment. And with that, I'd made my mind up. I needed to act quickly. This would only work if he wasn't expecting it. Getting to my feet, my vision pulsed slightly as nausea threatened to rear its head again, but it was nowhere near as oppressively debilitating as before. Quashing it down, my heart began to dance a frantic beat as I readied myself. Quietly walking towards the door, my feet feeling steadier than before, I gently rested my hand on the handle. Psyching myself up for what was about to come next, I counted down backwards from 3, before pushing the handle down as hard as I could. It moved freely with no resistance, and I threw my weight against the door, swinging it open wildly, and sending the security guard sprawling as I started to run. Pain exploded in my leg and chest, and my vision swam slightly before the adrenaline kicked in, dampening them to nothing but background sensations. The startled yells of the security guard as he stumbled to his feet and gave pursuit seemed to come from somewhere far away. All that mattered now was getting as far away from him and the store as possible. Bursting through a large pair of double doors, I was met with the glaring artificial light of the supermarket. Stunned shoppers gawped at me as I flashed past them, quickly followed by the hammering footsteps of the security guard. Some yelped and jumped out of the way as I approached. Others shouted curses or cheered the security guard, assuming that I was nothing more than a common thief. Darting through the aisles, the thundering footsteps and grunting breath of the guard seemed to be getting closer, and for a moment, I questioned if I'd just made things worse by trying to run. Picturing the faces of my wife and child, I pushed myself as hard as my body would allow towards the main entrance, practically sliding into the next aisle. The security guard skidded, easily swerving to follow me. I didn't know how much longer I'd be able to do this for. He was obviously fitter and faster than me, and it was only a matter of time before he caught up. Then I spotted something glinting ahead of me that sparked an idea. A towering display of cola cans, the glinting red metal stacked in a large pyramid at the end of the aisle. That was it. Charging as fast as I could towards the display, I reached out a hand and sent several of the cans flying as I bolted past. The best phrase I can use to describe what happened next is utter chaos. A deafening cacophony of metallic clanging filled the air as the cans clattered to the ground, rolling out in all directions and coating the floor like a shining red sea. A few ruptured, spraying their contents into the mess with a loud hiss. Startled yells from the other shoppers were drowned out by a second, almighty clatter as a security guard, who had obviously lost his footing in the sea of cans, flew headlong into what remained of the display, the surviving cans crashing down over him. His angry shouts and curses followed me as I left him in the distance, fumbling around in the mass of cans. I was doing it. I was actually doing it. I felt so stupid for how I'd thought before. The fact that I'd accepted my fate and given up without a fight. I was going to get out of this, and all I needed to do was run around the next aisle, and then I'd have a clear line to the exit. Skidding around the corner, the elation that had filled me moments ago came crashing down as I saw the sea of shoppers queuing for the tills, standing between me and the exit. There was no easy way through, and the footsteps that had started up behind me meant that the security guard was back on my tail. Without giving myself time to think, I ran as fast as I could to the nearest conveyor belt. Scrambling onto it, I charged along its length, knocking shopping flying left and right. The frightened, angry yells of shoppers followed my progress, mixing with the terrified scream of the cashier as I took a running leap over her. Landing hard and stumbling to my feet, I could hear the angry yells of the security guard as he tried to force his way through the crowd towards me. Charging forward again, the entrance doors were so close now, the gleaming sunlight and active car park just beyond them. A clicking sound met my ears from the other side of the door, and I turned to see one of the junior employees standing next to the automatic closing mechanism. His eyes were fixed on me, terrified, and his hand was shaking as he pressed the off button. I was trapped. There was no way these doors would open for me now. There was no way I'd have been able to run over to the mechanism, turn it back on, and then run out of the doors. The angry shouts of the security guard were getting closer, and he'd catch up with me in a matter of seconds. There was only one way out of this. Without missing a step, I ran at the doors, putting everything I had into my stride. Bringing my shoulder forward, I collided with the glass pane. It collapsed beneath me in an almighty crash before shattering violently, shards of broken glass coating me and spreading across the ground like transparent snowfall. Pain coursed through me, radiating from my shoulder as the effects of the impact took hold, dulling the screams and shouts of the shoppers behind me. I couldn't stop. I wasn't safe yet. I needed to get out of here. The police were on their way, and I had no idea how long it would be before they got here. I needed to get as far away as I could before the adrenaline wore off. Staggering across the car park, I weaved between the cars, crouching down to hide myself from the eyes of the security guard who had stared in stunned silence as I broke through the glass. My eyes watered with the pain that moving while crouching sent rippling through my chest, but the lack of footsteps chasing me urged me on. I was so nearly free. Making my way from car to car, hearing the shouts of the shoppers and the security guard getting quieter and quieter, I made my way back towards the houses and streets of the city. I didn't know how long I walked, but it wasn't until the faint sound of sirens filled the air that I decided it was best to get off the streets. Diving into a nearby alleyway, I finally allowed myself a second to rest. I couldn't believe what I'd just done. I'd escaped the clutches of capture. I was alive, and for the most part, doing okay. The security guard was probably telling the police about me now, though. They'd probably be looking out for me from now on, which would prove problematic. But right now, at least, I was okay. I had no idea what to do next, though. What the hell was I supposed to do now? I needed to keep moving, but how long could I keep that up for? Now that I was relatively safe, the warning that the masked man had given me last night reverberated around in my head. I was alone and helpless, and the organisers had made it painfully clear that I wouldn't be able to hide in the same place for the whole game. Looking down at my mangled right hand again in disbelief, I couldn't quite accept that last night had actually happened. A shrill pinging noise broke through the quiet of the alley, snapping me away from my thoughts with a start. It had come from my pocket. Perplexed, I reached for the source of the sound, cold metal and glass brushing against my hand. Grabbing a hold of it and bringing it out, the broken screen of my phone met my gaze. The masked man must have put it back into my pocket after he bandaged my hand. Unlocking the screen, a chill crawled through me as I saw that there was one new notification sitting there. It was from the Devil's Games app. I couldn't help but remember the last message I had received on the app and what happened afterwards. Shakily clicking on the notification, my heart jumped into my throat as the message popped up. Only a single line of text, but it still sent shivers coursing through me. Well done. Now you're getting into the spirit of things. I need to get moving again. I'll post the rest of this when I can. It's getting harder and harder to find safe places to update you guys anymore. But I need to get this out there. Hey guys, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I really appreciate each and every one of you watching. If you enjoyed this story, please feel free to check out my other videos for more original horror content. Also, I've released a full-length novel based on my "That Church is Abandoned for a Reason" story. It's available in both paperback and ebook format on Amazon. I've popped a link in the description. Check it out if you enjoyed my work. Thanks again for listening. Until our next descent into the darkness, remember, it's never just a story.